Well, EM, thank you so much for joining me today on Growing Up Fundie. I am stoked to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Doing all right. I just had a shower, so I feel like clean and
Wonderful.
cleansed.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We're doing great already. It's only up from here. 100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. For anybody who's listening, I don't know why they would know this, so they shouldn't know this, but we are siblings-in-law. You are married to my brother.
I
And
am.
yeah, you're like, actually, I needed to tell you. There's something I
You're
gotta
like,
tell
wait
you.
1 second.
You're like, wait, off the record. Wait, close it, turn off. And you are currently in the theater and the arts community in Chicago, where I was before I moved to Nashville. And you guys are active in directing and writing and acting and other things there in the city of Chicago. You're very busy.
We try to be.
Like, we try.
Yeah, we try to do the booked and blessed method as much as possible.
Oh, I like that. Booked and blessed. Booked and blessed.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I grew up the first of four siblings in the outskirts of Chicago in a suburb called Lake Zurich. Grew up there, grew up in like the exact same house, like the entire cul-de-sac was the exact same. So I've always I've always had a hard time with change because I think I just didn't experience it as a child that much. But grew up there, was very much involved in sports, and then quickly transitioned to like theater, choir type thing in late high school. Realized I loved it. Decided, okay, this is what I want to do for a living. Parents freaked out. They said, do something real. Like I think most parents do when somebody
Right.
when somebody tells their parents that I want to be an actor when I grow up.
Right.
So I went to school at Ball State for theater education because my dad was a middle school math and science teacher. So like I grew up in that type of household. But I realized very quickly that wasn't my bag. But I also didn't want to extend
Right.
school a few more years after that. So I ended up graduating with it. Did not get the actual license, which was like the very last step because I was a 22-year-old being like, I don't need a backup plan. like a dumbass. But am I allowed to swear on here?
Oh, go for it. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Totally.
Like a dumbass. Though I may try not to that much because of your mom. So I'll try to.
She doesn't listen to my podcast. She doesn't listen to my podcast.
Oh
Come
God,
on.
Carol.
Come on.
Carol doesn't listen to this podcast. That's hilarious. So I moved to Chicago and have been here for just over a decade. This is like year 10, I think, officially. And got into the theater scene. Joined a wonderful company called Broken Nose. I co-ran it for a few years. And during the pandemic, my spouse is Spencer, your brother, and I started talking about like, hey, like what do we really want to do? Because I think the pandemic like shook everybody up in terms of like,
Yes.
what do we want to do with our lives?
Yes.
And we had sort of realized like, hey, film and television has always like spoken to us. And while there is a huge film and television, I guess like sector here in Chicago, we realized that like, what was holding us back potentially from moving to somewhere like LA. And so we've been talking that over. And so we're going to be making that pilgrimage probably within the next year.
Ooh, good word. Pilgrimage. I like it.
Yeah, pilgrimage. Because we have no idea what to expect.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so that's pretty much like a very like quick thing. I also came out as like trans non-binary throughout the pandemic and did a lot of things like chopping off my hair, changing my pronouns, getting top surgery. So yeah, I did that. We actually, somebody at Ball State who I knew at Ball State, and he actually is now back there, Zach Bundy. Shout out to him. He was doing his essentially like final thesis, and he ended up doing a short documentary on two subjects or two people who are the subjects of this documentary about trans non-binary identity, and how that affects you as a person, the people around you, and also like the industry at large. And so he actually tracked the whole sector of me getting top surgery. And I actually just recently watched the final video, and it's such a beautiful piece because it's me who's like in their 30s figuring this out, and then it was somebody who was like about to graduate from Ball State, who had, I want to say they'd come out like in high school, and they had already like met a trans person in high school who had been on like T for like 3 years. And I was like, this was not my upbringing. I was like, bisexuality was like shunned and seen as people being in the closet. So like it was cool to sort of hear their side of things, just to hear like how much has changed just in like the generation from when I went to
absolutely.
High school and college. So that's like another cool thing that recently happened. But in terms of religion, so I came from the suburbs and was raised Catholic by my mother, sort of in a single trek. My dad sort of stayed out of the religious type things. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you about it because I definitely went through like those. I went through like the rebel teenage years of like, Mom, you're stupid for believing in this. And then I've slowly but surely evolved into like, I understand why this brings you joy and happiness. It does not bring it to me. So like, let's talk about that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I identify with that so much, just because that's literally why I started this podcast, because when you're really involved in it, it's easy to like judge people for being more involved in it, or to call them, that's crazy, or that's this, or that's that. But when you're on the outside of it, it's a lot easier to have conversations about it. It's a lot easier to sit down and have like a clear, calm conversation and be like, I genuinely just want to find out why it is that you feel so strongly about this, when it no longer really impacts you directly in that way. So you were raised Catholic, and how do you identify now in terms of religious, spiritual, atheist, agnostic?
I would say I'm sort of on the borderline between agnostic and atheist. I think like deep down I'm an atheist, but I want there to be hope. So that's why I sort of like lean toward agnostic, where I'm like, I think there's something floating around. I just don't know what that is.
I've talked a lot with people on this podcast about how the misconception on atheism is that there's nothing afterward and I'm happy about that. It's like, no, there's nothing afterward and I'm bummed about it. I'm really bummed and I wish that we're wrong. So what do you remember the first time that you were like, this whole Catholicism thing isn't really working for me? Do you remember what that was like, or what kind of triggered that?
Yeah, I feel like there were like a few stages. I think the first stage was just like when you're young and you're told to sit in a pew and you're listening to things that you don't really understand and you're not connecting with it. That creates a sort of like, I don't like it here, can we please leave type atmosphere.
Right.
And then it switched a little bit probably in like early middle school, because I was like, okay, well, if I'm forced to be here every Sunday, because we went every Sunday, I ended up trying to be like, okay, well, I like the music, so like I'm gonna sing loudly when I do it. And it was so hard for me to like understand what people were talking about. And we did a thing called CCD, which I actually don't know what it actually meant, because all of us in elementary and middle school, because we thought we were so fucking clever, called it the Central City Dub. That was like, what? Because again, we're 8.
I'm gonna Google it just to find out.
Yeah, but it was like a weekly or like bi-weekly thing on like Tuesday night. So it was like you had I was supposed to say, had your day job, you had school. And then you had to, like,
even back then, the hustle culture.
And then you had to go to this place, and then it was like learning the scriptures and doing all of that. And so, at that age, you start asking questions, and like, yeah, they're a bit like punk ass, but like they're also genuine of like, I am actively confused by this. can you give me clarification of what this is? And what tended to happen is it was either dismissal of the question altogether, or it was like a very fumbled, like, you just have to believe thing. And if you don't believe, that's your problem type thing, where it's like, well, then you have to work on you because God is perfect. And I was like, I just am not buying it. I'm like, I'm not buying this thing.
Yes.
And I also grew up with a dad who's, you know, both parents died before he was, I want to say like 20, 21. He watched his youngest brother get like hit by a car and die. And my dad, I think, just grew to this understanding of like, why would I believe that there's a higher power if they do stuff like that? Like, fuck this noise. So like my dad, I remember he would like be in his boxers sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, which I thought back then was just like the cartoon section. And all 5 of us, sans him, would like be like trudging out, and I'd be so upset because I'd be so jealous of my dad who got left behind every week. But I think I know I'm jumping around a bit, but I think there were other things. I think I didn't like, and this was more so in high school, you know, all of like the quote unquote cool kids would be like going in their Sunday best to these things. And I knew the shitty things they did like all week at school. And it was like this, like really, it was like this place where I'm like, are we all lying to ourselves? Like, what is actually happening? And I think I didn't like the idea of, okay, if you come here, you can get, you know, your sins can be removed and then you get a clean slate. And I was like, and in my thought process, like my little childhood mind, I was like, but then you're not learning the lesson of what you did if you're just like continuously begging for forgiveness and then like trudging off like back to whatever. And I think I also saw quite a few people get divorced during that era, because you would see these like perfect families, and all of a sudden you found out, and it was always the dad and it was always the secretary. And like it was that type of like basic like suburban type thing of like, dude has a middle-age crisis, leaves high school girlfriend who has had 4 kids with him for like a younger person because he needs to relive his childhood and adulthood again. And so I think I was seeing a lot of like fake acknowledgement. And so I think I was just like, I don't know if I want to be involved in something in which it really feels like there's these like two sides to it. And also like, I mean, like, I think most churches like ours was a bit like ravaged in controversy. Like there was, I want to say it was Father Ron. You know, I feel like with the Catholic Church, it becomes a like, oh, which Holy Father is going to your house on what day? And so it was a lot of like weird things like that. And one day he had, I want to say I was in middle school, so like I fully didn't understand what had happened. But now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, that happened. I was told that he hit his car into parked cars while he was driving home. And now in my adulthood, I know that you can really only do that when you're like quite pissed drunk.
Right.
Like,
right.
like,
like, oh,
like,
oops.
It wasn't, yeah. I was like, you don't accidentally hit 2 parked cars. Like that, that's very hard to do.
Right.
And I remember us going to church that Sunday, and he was on this like apology guilt tour, and he was crying the whole time, and everybody was saying it was okay and like all of this stuff. And I even remember my mom sitting there with me, and we were like, this is bullshit, right?
Yeah, like, wait a second.
This feels like, yeah, like this feels like we're forgiving and we're not acknowledging what actually happened. Again, I think it always comes back to, what did you learn? How can you apply it to do better next time? And it felt like the teachings in the Bible were a lot of like really big, like Cain and Abel, like David and Goliath type stuff that like, yes, we could sort of things together. I hated the whole idea. And I think Catholicism goes outside of this, but the whole idea of like not having sex until you're married and that whole thing, and like not being open to teaching kids. Cause I know the church that I went to had a school attached to it. And there was a teacher who actually got fired for explaining how to have safe, protected sex there. They were just like, because they were teaching abstinence. And in the public schools, we were shown, you know, in middle school, I remember like we were shown like, here's a penis with chlamydia, here's a vagina with gonorrhea. And it was just like really, really like rampant STD based genitalia. And that was their way of telling us, don't have sex because you'll get this. And then, you know, the young women were, you know, sent to this is how you don't get raped class, and the boys were like played scrimmage the whole time, which again completely shows the idea of like, why aren't we teaching boys to not rape?
Right.
And why are we teaching these like 13-year-old girls how to like I remember the stuff that I was told, and then we'll get back to Catholicism, but I think this all like bleeds into it. I remember being told the stuff that I needed to say. Well, I was told to never park near another car. And I was told to always look under my car before I got into it. And this is like 3 years before we have driver's license. Like we were not even in driver's ed. We were nowhere close. And then I was told to never yell that I was being raped because nobody helps you. I was told to say fire because people tend to come there more quickly with fire than with rape. And it was like essentially, no, leave me alone. Don't hurt my baby. I have AIDS. That was what we were told to say in succession. Like I still remember that to this day. That is what we were told as like 12-year-olds.
What?
Yeah.
That's wild. That is a first. I don't run into a lot of firsts with this podcast, and that is a first. And
this was like a public school in like suburban Chicago. Yeah.
That's wild. Wow. And so I have so many questions. I don't even know like which one to start with. So at what age did you like stop going to church? At what age were you like, I don't have to do this anymore? Did you have to wait until you were out of the house in college or when you were in high school?
Pretty much I did not have a choice when I was home. And so I went away to college, and I remember going to like 1 or 2 masses that they're just like, I don't even think it was like a Catholic church, but it was sort of just say like, come one, come all type thing. And I think I went there for Easter because I was feeling incredibly homesick by that point. And I was like, I need to like connect back to like something from home. And it still just didn't really give me what I could clearly tell it was giving my mom. It was giving my mom like an oasis. It was giving my mom like an escape. Not like she was necessarily escaping from anything, but I think she was like just able to like be present and like not have to think about like the 4 kids and what meal is going to be next. And
it was like meditative almost for her.
Yeah, it was for me. What I can define it as now is I'm like, that is my mom's version of therapy. Mm. And I think that's what a lot of our past generations were, where it was like, I don't have a place to like think my thoughts and feel my feelings and be not disturbed for an hour. And I'm like, if you need a place like that, you go to church.
Yeah.
So I do think that's probably why there was such an appeal in regards to that. But yeah, it was really college was when I pretty much like stopped. But like I went through like first communion, I went through confirmation, and all of that. And another fun fact that we can also dive into in a little bit, I think the way that I was even raised, and I don't even think anybody meant to do this, but I think it's also just like the Catholic Church as a whole. I look at myself as like a competent human being. I can be, the the butt of a joke, like most people, are like not follow along on a story. But I truly believed up until late high school that religion was like your race. Like you were born into it and you couldn't change it. Like
Yep.
in my entire upbringing in the Catholic Church, now once was I told, if this is not interesting to you, there is a wide array of other things that you can look at. Like I
Yeah.
thought, like my Buddhist friends were born Buddhist, like my Jewish friends were born Jewish, and I did not realize that I had a choice until like after confirmation. It was like after I like
Yeah.
went through the whole thing.
Yeah. I was the
There's the
same
whole
way. I
joke.
thought, like, each nuclear family had, like, an assigned religion. Like, we were
Mhm.
Baptist, our cousins were Catholic. It wasn't because they were, like, worse or better, it's just because they had a different mom and
Yeah,
dad, and they also went to a different church and were a different religion. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I did not know my great grandparents too well because one had died. My great grandmother had died before I really like cognitively knew her, because I want to say she was around when I was born, but like then she passed away, and then my uh, great grandpa passed away. I want to say when I was in sixth grade, but like I remember like one of like the big family discussions was like I want to say like she was Lutheran and he was like Protestant, or like she was Protestant and he was Lutheran, and it was like this
Yes.
whole thing about like,
Yeah.
oh, like the kids got to then like choose where they want to go and all of
Yep.
that, and like how did they do it, and like it was just one of
Yeah.
those things where I was like, really, this is the okay.
Yeah. And so even when you decided to step back from going to church, did you consider yourself at that point non-religious, or just you didn't want to go to church anymore? Did you feel like you had the ability to say, like, I'm not a religious person?
I think our my poor mother. I think what happened is all of the kids sort of ganged up on her and said, "We don't like this place. Like we're like agnostic or atheist. We don't believe there is a God. You're cuckoo for believing in one." Again, it's like when you're 14, 15, you're an asshole.
Yeah.
And I
You
think
know
like everything is
everything.
very much a, yeah, you believe you know everything. Everything is incredibly extreme, and like there's no nuance to
There's
anything you
black and
do.
there's white, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think because my younger siblings were also starting to catch on to not necessarily liking it, my brother got hugely into I was gonna say Darwin, but it's not. Who is the guy who's like really popular with atheists?
There's Hitchens, Dawkins. I mean, Darwin
Dawkins.
is one of, yeah, Dawkins. Okay, I was gonna say Darwin is one of them.
Dawkins. Yeah, Ben got huge into Dawkins, and I think that killed my mother a bit inside. She has said on more than one occasion that she believes that, and I think this is also why I don't like this like culty feeling of religion. My mom, to a certain degree, believes that she failed as a Catholic mother by not
Oh,
having
that's
any
tough.
Catholic kids. And the thing I kept telling her is I was like, Mom, this is a bunch of smoke and mirrors at the end of the day. I'm like, these kids who are here every week with their parents are dicks in school, are shitty human beings. And I'm like, you have four kids who like have empathy, care about people other than themselves. I was like, that I'm like, technically what was happening is I was like, we had the teachings, quote unquote, of Catholicism. We
Right.
just didn't believe in the religion itself.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
you know what I mean? I'm like, we're technically like
Yes.
going by the 10 commandments, but like, I don't want to sit in a place that like, and you know, in high school and early college, I was like, that was before like same-sex religion or same-sex marriage was, you know, officially passed. And like, it was just, I couldn't go to a place in which every weekend I had to say in like a prayer thing that like, you know, marriage is between a man and a woman, because I didn't believe that then. And now with who I have become, I'm like, I definitely don't believe that now. And so it's
Yeah.
just, it,
Right.
I just, it felt like a ruse of like, so we're talking about this God who accepts everybody, but we clearly have this list of people that we don't like. And
Right.
I would like to know more about that, and nobody could answer me.
Yeah, yeah, and there's such a huge, um, what's the word, a system of belief within religion, in Catholicism, in evangelical fundamentalism, even in some sects that are found outside of the United States, that thinks that in order to have morality, you have to have religion. There are some people that literally can't wrap their mind around how a moral person cannot believe in God. And I tell people all the time, the 10 Commandments aren't like copywritten God, the Bible. The 10 Commandments are just decent advice. The 10 Commandments
Mm-hmm.
are just what people figured out they needed to do in order for their tribes to survive, right? It's never
Mm-hmm.
been a good idea to murder people in your tribe, because then your tribe fails, right? If you murder
Yeah.
everyone, there's no more tribe left and then you starve to death. It's never been a good idea to covet your neighbor's wife. It's never been a good idea to be gluttonous, right? These have never been good ideas. Just because the actual list is found to be in the Bible does not mean that that was the invention of morality. Morality has been
Mm-hmm.
around forever. Morals have existed forever. And the proof that you need that morals are subjective are that even the most faithful religious people in your life can be the most immoral people in your life. By that
Mm-hmm.
argument, the most moral people should be those people. But we have found time and time again, by finding people on apps that they shouldn't be on and leaving comments on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram accounts they don't realize are public because they're old and they don't know how Instagram works and things like that, that like
Yep.
they are not what they consider to be a moral person, right? Like, I don't think it's immoral to be on Grindr. But if you are a man who stands at the pulpit every single day and preaches that it is immoral to be on Grindr and that those people are going to hell and that they are disgusting examples of abomination, and then we find you on
Mm-hmm.
Grindr, that makes you an immoral person. That makes you a liar. That makes you dishonest.
Yeah.
And that makes you, in my opinion, evil, because you're indoctrinating human beings.
Yeah.
And so I think like people who are good people, like your mom, I think she might think that because she didn't raise Catholic kids, she's afraid she didn't raise moral kids, which could not be further from the
Mm-hmm.
truth. I've never had a
Yeah.
negative experience with any of you.
Aw. Yay.
Um, so at what age did you start to question your identity? Were you like, maybe this whole straight thing isn't for me either? Maybe this whole identifying as femme doesn't work for me either? Because you've always been
Mm-hmm.
a tomboy since I've known you. Like that's
Yeah.
never not been part of your identity. But I'm curious, like, did that come out slower because of Catholicism, unrelated to Catholicism? Did it come out sooner because of Catholicism? Like, how did that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think in terms of Catholicism specifically, like it is such a hetero based religion that is very like male power based. Like the fact that like females can't be priests, and usually it was always like the choir boys, and it was always like it was, you could tell like the females were always secondary. I mean, like even in like the Bible teachings, I mean, like most of them are male that you have these stories about. Most of the females who you come across, it's like we talk about Mary Magdalene, but everybody was like, but she was a slut too. And it was like
Yeah.
it's this whole weird thing. And even just the whole idea of like the fact that Mary got impregnated without having sex is also, I think, very undeniably a anti-sex type thing. And so, I mean, in terms of what I've been telling people is, I'm like, because people are like, oh, this like came out of nowhere. Like, even though like the tomboyishness, it was like, oh, like this is a surprise. I'm like, oh, I've known since the age of 3. I was like,
Yeah.
I didn't know what the words were because there really weren't trans identities who were very like open back then at all. It was, I feel like growing up in the 90s, it was very like transvestite type thing and like drag queen
Yes.
type identities, and neither of those I identified with, because I think there are certain people who they very much communicate through what they wear. And like, while that is like a big aspect of my life, sometimes those are a lot more like, I guess like they're louder, and I was never like a loud clothes wearer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm like still not to this day. But I think I think growing up only really seeing hetero couples and people like I remember distinctly, and again it's through technically no fault of anybody else's. It was the age that it was. Like, I remember having neighbors, who I still love and adore to this day. One of the neighbors' sisters was gay, like very much a like Ellen DeGeneres type, where it was like short hair, vest. And I remember it was like her and her roommate Denise. It was one of those things where I was like, even
Huh.
back then, I was like, I'm aware something's going on. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I don't know what this means, but I was like, these are not roommates. Like,
Yeah.
I
Like
am highly aware that these are not roommates. And like my mom had two, because she could hear, she had two people, who were a lesbian couple. One had been married to a man, had a child, divorced, and then met Mary. And like, Mary was one of those like beautiful like butch lesbians. Like, she worked for the post office. Like, there was a part of me that I'm like, did Fun Home write about Mary? Like, is that the Ring of Keys thing? Um, and she had a tattoo of her cat. This is so weird, but I loved her for it. I didn't understand why. She had a cat tattoo on her ankle that she actively would would shave around so it was furry. Like, it was like she was that type of 90s lesbian.
oh my
I am
God.
sure, I am sure, hopefully I'm not outing this individual, but I believe like Miss Edwards at my elementary school was a lesbian because she wore Tweety Bird and Looney Tunes, which I feel like was a dead giveaway in the
That
90s.
was should have
Um,
been like the biggest red flag. Anybody who wore like angry Tweety shirts, you're like, okay,
yes,
I see you.
yes.
Yes.
And I'm like, I see you, I hear you.
Yeah.
But like, I remember not being necessarily attracted to any of those individuals. I very
Yeah.
much had um I was very much still like attracted to like mask bodies. And so I grew up being like, okay, this is like, yeah, like I'm supposed to like boys. Here's my liking of boys. But I specifically remember in early high school, my brother's middle school was doing a production of Seussical the Musical, which was like hella popular back then.
Oh yeah.
And the Cat in the Hat for that production was a female, and she wore a tux because she was the Cat in the Hat. And I'm like a sophomore, and I'm sitting there watching it, and I get that like tingliness down there, and I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh no," because in my mind, what I actually did in that moment is I actually, and this is also where I get angry with how we've like talked about just like people of the LGBTQIA plus community of like being like pedophiles, because that was my immediate like thought. I was like, we're underage. That makes me a pedophile. And it actively stopped myself from exploring those feelings further. Like, not necessarily like with that person, because like they're in eighth grade. I
Right.
high school. Like, that's not gonna happen. But like, I actively shut down those thoughts to further explore by myself,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes any sense. And I think also at that time, because I knew I was still attracted to male bodies, I was like, I'm just going to stay on this track because this feels like the easy track, um,
Right. And
towards
also
society, which,
knowing what I know about you, also, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that response was to the suit, to like a woman wearing a
oh
suit.
yeah,
Like, because
hmm
even before you came out and you transitioned, I feel like you were very much like a suit person and a vest person and like a slacks person. You were very much like what
hmm
I'm trying, there used to be like a fashion word for it, but basically like menswear looked like your vibe. And so I wouldn't be surprised at
yeah,
all if little girl you was like, I'm feeling all these excited feelings. And it was like,
yeah,
wow, a girl wearing a suit. I didn't know that was allowed. That looks really good. I want to do that,
hmm
you know?
yeah. Well, and even with the generation of people starting to do that, if you look at red carpet stuff, there's still feminizations of most of them. Like they're in like 12-inch heels. And I was like, don't
Right.
want that.
Right.
Or it's like very fit to like then fluctuate the female
Right.
curves
Or the
that
cleave.
you,
There's no shirt underneath. They're just wearing the
yeah.
tux as a the tux jacket as a shirt.
Hmm. Yeah. So I feel like religion sort of really suppressed that in me. And like there was like a deep feeling of like it was weird. It almost felt like I didn't want to be a burden and be different and have my family have to deal with that. So it's like I took a lot on the chin. I feel like for a very long time. Um and like the main thing that I always come back to, I mean the main question that we tend to get from anybody who is like over the age of like 45, 50 is the first question they tend to ask is, so does that make Spencer gay? And it's like, no, that's not what that
No. No.
like the,
No, not
the
at all.
amount of times that people have asked us that, I can count on more than two hands. Like it's just, and the thing is each time totally genuine. Like
Right.
totally genuine. They're just curious because I think they immediately are like, it's that weird, like, basic thing, so it's like, so how does that work now? Like, what because I understand, like, female body, male body, how does this now? Um
And in their mind, the only transition you can make is from man to woman. There's no other, or like woman to man. There's no other
Mhm,
transition. There's no spectrum. There's no, I don't feel like I identify with either one of those. So in their mind, it's like, oh, okay, so you're a man now. Okay, so that must mean that he's
mhm.
married to a man. And it's like,
Yeah,
even though they are trying to be accepting and they're trying to understand, it's still so ingrained socially and maybe even religiously in them that they still can't comprehend anything other than one of those two things. So if you're transitioning, it has to be to one of those.
yeah. I think actually looking back and I would believe my family would, like, potentially disagree, but I'm like, "No, I think so." I think where a lot of people's brains are breaking is the fact for non-binary individuals or somebody like me who would like identify as like trans non-binary because I do not identify as male. Like I enjoy a lot like of the male like culture and clothing and all of that. Like I never felt I think another thing is just like growing up, I never felt connected to the clothes that I was wearing. I was always jealous of my younger brother's wardrobe. And like I would get like the pinks and purple stuff, and I was like, I don't want this. I really want that like thing over there instead. Um, and oh, where was it going with this? Oh, I there is a part of me that almost wonders if it would have been easier for my family, where I'm like, I am now like I am now Greg, and I go by he him, and this is who I
Right.
am. Like weirdly, I think it would have been easier for them than where they see as like the they themness of it all um in terms of that. And I think the big thing that I've sort of had to like really walk back is I'm like, yes, being non-binary does mean that you identify with both sides of the spectrum. I would say I probably overall identify like physically and visually, I feel like less than like 10% female at this point because I think for a really long time my mom really held on to the fact that I was both. But what was happening is each time the option for both happened, it was always the female part.
Right.
Because well, you're also that. And it's like yes, but also if I have been living that for this point, we're probably going to be leading this way a lot
Right.
harder um in terms of those types of things. But yeah, I don't think society has set us up to have those types of conversations.
Right.
I also think we weren't really like a confrontational family. And I talked with them about this. I was like, I don't know if we negotiate well. Like, I don't know if we actually are good as a family having conversations in which not necessarily like opinions differ, but more so like, hey, my opinion doesn't match yours, so I'm going to do this. And that doesn't mean that I'm, you know, changing the system, or I am changing the dynamic of this family. Cause I think for a while when I came out, there was definitely this like feeling of like, they started treating me as if I had like changed drastically. And I was actually still pretty much myself. I just felt
Yeah.
a lot more comfortable with who I was. I was like, I didn't really change too much. And I don't know if that also then became the, well, if you didn't change too much, why can't we just stay on this track that we were on? Like it just,
Right.
it was one of those things
Right.
where it's like, well, why can't we just, and it took a while for me to sort of just have to like really sit them down and sort of be like, hi, I know you all think this is a phase or an attention grabber thing. It's not. It's incredibly hard. It's incredibly painful. And like I had to pretty much at some point came out to my mom and I was like, I don't think you realize I was like, I was incredibly, incredibly close to suicide quite a few times. And I was like, I have a loving spouse and I would never want to leave him. But I was like, that's how bad it got for me in my head before I was able to like really do this. I was like, and it took sort of to that, unfortunately, for there to really be some kind of turn. And like, you know, we still have good days, bad days type things, but it's a lot better than it was when I first came out, because I essentially had to stop speaking to them for a few months because they were
Yeah.
just not getting it, and I needed to do it for my own well-being. And my mom to this day still doesn't fully understand that that choice. She
Yeah.
saw that as a betrayal, instead of how I saw it as, no, this is me trying to save this, so I just don't leave and never come back. Like
Right.
so, but I think that is the upbringing. I think it is the feeling of like, no, we have to move through this as one. And I'm like, hey, sometimes like I need that break.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I think it goes back to that whole it had to her brain had to process it as an attack on her, just like the not being Catholic thing. It has to mean that she did something wrong as a parent, you
yeah.
know, as opposed
Hmm.
to this is just who your child is. You know, you raise them to be a moral person who does good things and is
Hmm.
creative and is artistic and has a spouse who loves him very much. It has to be like, no, they're doing this to attack me. They're doing this to get back at me for something. When in reality,
Hmm.
that's not it at all. And I remember when you first came out, one, because I was living at my parents' house at the time, and
Hmm.
I think you guys called me and then you called them or vice versa. But I remember
Yep.
I was talking to them about it, and my mom was just relieved that you weren't knocked up and going to ruin your career. She like that was my mom's response is because like the way that it was revealed, she was like, oh no, like are they pregnant? Are they gonna have a baby? Like, is this what's going on? Because they've got a lot of plans. Like, and so her first
Hmm.
instinct was like, oh, like don't get me wrong, like I would be happy for them, but I know that's not what they want right now. I'm just relieved. And then I think the
Yeah.
first question I asked you the next time I saw you was my main curiosity was what was so difficult about life not identifying as they them that dealing with all the difficulties of being someone who identifies
Hmm.
as they them was easier than what it was before. And like you explained it so eloquently, because I remember thinking like everywhere you go from now on you're going to probably have to correct people and you're going to get reactions from people who don't understand. Some people may be shitty and even say something about it, although hopefully that doesn't happen. But like I just
Hmm.
remember that was my only question about the whole thing was what was it about life beforehand that was so bad that the difficulties we know for a fact are coming with the life after are
Hmm.
preferable.
Yeah.
And I just thought your response to that was like so it really cleared it up for me in terms of like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like you want to live
Hmm.
authentically, you want to be identified authentically, you want to feel like yourself in your own skin. And if people get your pronouns wrong every now and then, you might have to correct them, but that's so much better than literally feeling like you're so lost you want to die because you're trapped
Hmm.
as a person that you don't feel like.
Yeah. Well, and it's really one of those things where once you have the internal realization and you sort of realized it within yourself, it essentially becomes like death by a thousand cuts, because each time somebody misidentifies you, and I truly believe the misidentification feeling starts the minute you internally know it.
Right.
So like, there could have been a few months where like people were saying she, her because like I hadn't come out yet, but like it was already like each one was like a cut. And so it was then trying to be like, okay, well, I don't want to like there was this weird feeling of like guilt and shame. And I think that's why the suicide rate is so high for trans and just other members of our community, because I think there's this unfortunate feeling of helplessness of like, do I want to disappoint, or would it be easier if I just went quietly still as myself? And
Right.
I think that's why I get, and I'm trying to get better at not getting so heated so quickly, because when people really push back with like the they them, or why can't people just be like quote unquote normal?
Or that's not grammatically correct. Derp derp derp.
Yeah, I mean, my dad is probably not pleased by this, but like we've had two or three really, really bad convos, like to the point where it is screaming and like threatening to leave and never come back. Like, because and it's because of this like inability to just click and understand that like, hey, this like world tab thing is shifting, and like it just like, yes, like words naturally evolve. Like this is a thing, and like my dad is like wicked smart, but for some odd reason like this was one thing that like he just could not, and he really still to this day he just omits pronouns when it comes to me, and it's because he's a stubborn mule and I've got that in me from him. And so for me, I'm like, hey, as long as you aren't saying she, her, if you are repeating my name over and over again, and that's your way of being able to like see me without like pushing past things that you disbelieve, I'm like, that's fine. I think you're making it harder for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm like, if that's, I think like those are some of the things that I have come to realize, because I think like this whole journey has been like very like ebb and flow, very up and down, in regards to like what I believe my needs are versus like what other people need to like catch up on, um, in regards to all of that. But I've never felt better than after officially like saying this. And I think this is why like things like in the church, it needs to become so much more naturalized, and like we just got to come back to this reality of like we aren't going away, like this is not going to change. And I think some of the things that I felt with my mom when it happened, I think were like those natural things of like, well, what am I going to say to my friends? Like, what if they start asking? Because I grew up in the theater. I had a lot of gay friends. I had
Right.
friends who I knew were gay 5 years before they came out as gay, because that was just again
Right.
the time. Like
Yeah.
kids kids 10 years ago came out when they went to college and like had experiences, felt very confident in the community they created there, and then they came back home to the community that they were a little bit shakier on and said, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm gay." Um and like I know for a fact like my mom loves all people, but for some odd reason, I think again, it is this thing of like, oh, but I was supposed to create like the perfect nuclear family. What happened? And I am
Right.
fucking up the nuclear family. And so it just, and I think that's also why there's a lot of like shame that sort of comes through it. But
Yeah.
again, I think there is this perpetualness of like, when you see all of this over and over again, like, yeah, the natural thing is going to feel like, well, that's different. That's odd type
Yes.
thing.
And I think I don't know about the Catholic Church. I know that the Christian Church perpetuates that whole love the sinner, hate the sin ideology. And so I
Mhm.
think the reason it's so easy for people to very much embrace other people's gay children and other people's trans children and then totally freak out or get confused or lose the opportunity to embrace their own child is because it's easy to say, yes, come into my flock. Like, we love you. We'll be a part of you. We'll heal whatever your parents did
Mhm.
wrong.
We'll heal
You
the
know,
ailment. Yeah.
yes, like what your parents did wrong will show you what a healthy home is like. But when their kids are the ones saying, I'm gay, I'm trans, these different things, it again goes back to that whole, am I being attacked right now? Am I being attacked? Are you saying I'm a bad parent? When those words never ever come out of your mouth, ever, even one
Mm-mm.
time. But they've just been, and I honestly, I don't even blame the parents. I still blame the church for that, because the church is the one that told them a godly family looks like this, a godly mother, a godly husband, a godly father looks like this. And so, of course, they would think that there's something wrong and that some bad thing is going to come out of this, because that's also what they were told. And they
Mhm.
genuinely believe it. I think what gets lost, especially generationally, is that
Mhm.
Gen Z and Gen X forget that what they're being told by their parents and their parents' generation is genuinely what they believe. Like, your mom
Mhm.
genuinely believes that Catholicism can help you and that God can help you, and that
Mhm.
she genuinely believes that you are harming yourself by straying from the church. And so they're not doing these things out of malice. They're doing these things out of fear, shock, and the
Mhm.
idea that they've been told people like you are going to hell, right? And people like
Mhm.
me probably are going to hell, right? And like, yeah, I'm sure, like, I
Yeah.
shaved my head. It's
I
that
feel like I'm
probably
also
somewhere
on
in the
that
Bible.
train.
Right. Thanks. And so, and so I don't think that these parents are what we consider to be bigoted people, even though they are acting bigoted and what they're saying is bigoted and what they believe is bigoted. They truly think that our generation is making a huge mistake that eternally is going to punish them, and eternally they will never
Mhm.
be able to come back from once they die. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's sad. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, how being on the outside of it is a lot easier to have a conversation about it. I genuinely find that I feel bad for people like that. I feel sad for them. You know, where I used to be like, F you, you bigoted boomer or whatever. Now I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, these things that you're saying to me are like, you are terrified that you're not going to hang on to me enough and I'm going to slip into hell. Like, you're so
Mhm.
scared that you're going to let go and I'm just going to slip into sin and debauchery and hell, and you won't be able to save me if you don't do it right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think we'd be remiss to not comment on the fact that, and I think this is also where I'm just completely flabbergasted, and again, why I feel like religions are more culty than we sort of like claim them to be, is this idea of like the Catholic Church is incredibly known for the amount of priests who have molested boys. And like that is pedophile molestation. Like
Right.
these are men in positions of power utilizing it against children.
Right.
And I think there is this like complete blinder effect of like the same people who are terrified of two men in their 30s getting married but refuse to leave congregations in which, wow, this is the third priest in the row that has had to go on leave. Like this has happened at my
Yes.
church with priests
Yes.
multiple times. And you know what? Some of those allegations are not true. Sometimes they are unfortunately like troubled teens who have grown up and are, you know, um, are trying to find their way. But I'm like, there are also a lot of kids who were molested and the church hid that for years. And I mean, they're
Actively.
still actively and they're still pretty much hiding it. Like we're not really still talking about it. Like the only time we talk about it is whenever like the Washington Post does another like, you know, a mic drop piece. And so I think I'd be remiss to not comment on that as well, of like there is this like deep dichotomy of like technically what is happening with the leaders, quote unquote, of our church is, you know, that is prison time. Like,
Yes.
what these
Yep.
22-year-olds are doing and experimenting in college and, like, learning about their bodies, I'm like, "That's not jail worthy." Like, that's young people figuring out their way, and so I think there's such, like, a huge difference in that, and it boggles my mind that, this can happen so many times, and everybody's like, "Well, it's not everybody," and you get, like, one gay person, and then they're like, "Well, this is everybody."
Right, right,
Uh,
right,
Type thing.
right.
There
That's
is a huge, huge difference in that.
yes, and, like, you can it is such common knowledge that sexual abuse is happening in the Catholic Church that it is literally a meme. It is literally something
Mhm,
you can be like, "At least I'm not a priest, ha, ha, ha," like, and
mhm, yeah,
and and the LGBTQ community is the problem? Like,
mhm,
it is
yeah.
literally a meme. It is a well-known it's just wild to me because you would think, like,
I
in most other positions of power, they would be out of power.
Mhm. I think what is really happening in terms of, like, the quote unquote "gay agenda" is I think there's a lot of people who are terrified that, like, more people will, like, turn queer, when in reality, the thing that I tell people is I'm like, "If you are afraid that more visibility will have more people coming out, the answer is yes." And the reason for that is not necessarily that they are being turned, it is the fact that they are finally seeing somebody who they identify with, and they're able, because, like, I did not know a non-binary person until I was in my late 20s. And it
Right,
wasn't until
same.
I met that person that I was like, "Oh, that's what that is that I have been feeling
Yes.
all of my life," because I knew I wasn't a lesbian. Like, I knew that because there was a whole joke in my friend group that they were like, "You're a closeted lesbian." And I was like, "But I'm not though." I was like, "I'm
Yeah,
very aware that I'm not." I'm like,
yeah.
"It's very different." Um, and it's like, yeah, so, like, I hope that people seeing more people like myself out there will then hopefully get them to think internally one way or another, whether they're like, "Nope, still straight," like, you know what I mean? Or it's like, "Oh, no, this is actually something that I'm interested in." And so I think, oh, where was I going with that? But yeah, I think having that visibility more is just going to help, and it is going to flourish and continue to
Right.
grow, and, yeah.
Like, giving somebody a parade does not create them. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm,
it just gives them the opportunity to celebrate themselves. Like, "Don't ask, don't tell" existed decades before our generation were even zygotes, before our parents were even old enough to be pregnant with
mhm,
us. So which shows you you guys have been around the whole time. The LGBTQ community has been
mhm,
around the whole time. Don't ask, don't tell was like, if you don't act like it, you can hang out with us. So I don't
yeah,
understand why they think our generation is creating these people and developing these people as if we have some lab somewhere that's like turning people
yeah,
into trans people or gay people when they've been around for so long that there's literally been laws since ancient history on how to deal with
mhm,
homosexuality. And so that
mhm,
to me that like that alone negates that idea. But like you said, allowing them to be visible and allowing them to be out and allowing them to be open and public just makes it seem like there's more because they're not afraid of their life. They're not afraid of being bullied or harmed or
mhm,
arrested or dishonorably discharged or in some countries literally murdered. Um
yeah,
and I just think it's ridiculous that the idea that we are, like, creating a certain type of person. One, I still fail to see why that would be a bad thing anyway. Like, I don't understand why that would be harmful, if that were true, which it's not. But two,
mhm,
it's not even a thing. We're just allowing people to be out, and now to because we're talking about it and because we're having these conversations, we're coming up with names for what has already existed. So maybe non-binary wasn't a thing in the 80s. Maybe trans wasn't a thing in the 80s, even though it was. But
mhm,
we're not inventing the existence of these people just because we're giving them a name and we're giving them a title and we're putting a word to what it is that they've been living with for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think, looping it even back into Catholicism, like my dad made this joke, which made my mom very angry. I think he was like, the reason the Catholic Church continues to go on is because they just continue to bore babies into it. Like, that's why the, no sex till you're married. Like, the amount of people, whenever I hear about somebody getting married between the ages of 19 and 21, my first question is, are they religious? Because 90% of the time they are religious, holding out for that first time. And I'm like, we are making families that are not ready for their lives. And so I think probably, deep down or very far forward, many generations ago, one of the biggest reasons why people were so anti-gay is it was like, well, you can't produce children together, so therefore you are useless to us. So like, I do genuinely believe that is potentially a reason, because I'm also like, because it's also one of those things where it's like, okay, well, now we've treated you shittily forever, and so you're most likely going to not join our church. So like, let's not let you adopt, because then if you adopt, then there's going to be more people who also may not like our practices. And so I do feel like a lot of it does sort of come back to those things, and socioeconomic status. Like, we all know that, like, well, not all of us, but I'm like, these abortion laws are to keep the poor people poor. Like, this is like, that is straight up what it is. Because if people, the thing that I say is, if these men, because they're all men, care so much about these unborn children, what are you doing when they are born? And the answer is fucking nothing. And that's where I'm like, that's where I again get angry and frustrated. So like, it's
pro-life versus pro-birth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And so do you consider yourself, like, are you angry at the Catholic Church? Are you no longer angry? Were you ever? Do you consider yourself kind of beyond that, fascinated by it? What are your thoughts when you think of when somebody says, like, oh, I'm Catholic, or maybe you like pass a Catholic mass or something like that? What do you think about?
Well, I still go on very rare occasion because my mom plays bells in the choir, so I like to support her in that way. So that's really the only time that I ever go to church, is if she is ringing, and she asks, and then I sort of just work on through it. And the thing is I still have, friends and family who go religiously, and for me, like, I am very much past that, like, teen tween phase of, like, the eye roll of, like, you're going there type thing, because again, I've realized for some people that is their therapy, and that is, they learn teachings from that they then apply. I think for me, I feel like whenever I meet somebody new and I find out they're religious, there's always like a bit of sus, because I'm like, so what have you been fed? Like, do you actually questions? So I tend to, like, stay a little bit back, but the thing that I try to do is I try not to, like, yuck someone's yum. I'm like, until something is said that it's like, okay, well, that's racist, sexist, or like, that's a little bit bigoted, I will let that person, be whatever they want to be. And my whole thing is, I'm like, believe what you want to believe, as long as there's no undue harm on other people. Like, my mom truly believes that she is going to unite with her mom and dad in heaven, and who am I to say that's a dumb fallacy? Because I'm not gonna lie, in a small part in the back of my head, I'm like, I really hope I'm fucking wrong, because I'd love to see you again. Like, you know what I mean? Like I still have those thoughts of, like, I want to believe that. I think if you stripped the like hierarchy of what the Catholic Church is, and it was just like, people get together, they talk about how to be a good person, and they sing some songs, I'm like, oh, I'm like totally into that. I'm like, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Like, that feels like a feel good activity. Like if you really
Yes.
like dumb it down to that, where it's like we're going to talk about like a theme in which we're going to learn like nice and not nice things. I think the other thing that I had recently actually talked about with my therapist was I feel like we are brought up to believe that good and evil exists, and those are sort of like the two working dichotomies. And we got into this whole topic about like really what we are is a very capitalistic society in which a lot of bad people are just okay people get away with a lot of stuff, and a lot of good people, bad things happen to them whether they're meant to or not, and life isn't fair. And I feel like sometimes with Catholicism there is this feeling of like regardless of how bad it is, the kingdom of heaven will be there for you. And I think there is this feeling of like trudging forward that I think the church gives to people. Because again, I think that's probably something my mom takes home every week. Where if she is a really tough week, she's like, you know what, the kingdom of heaven is waiting for me. My mom is waiting for me. Like, you know, God is with me. Like those are all very positive things to push through life. I think that can negatively affect how you work through things, because I think if you're like, all will be well in the end, there is this feeling of like, well, can we figure out how it's nice now? Because it's like we're
Yeah.
we're here now. We're here
Yes.
now. So like I would
Yes.
like it to be nice now.
Right.
Um
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
think, oh, continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, no.
Oh, I was just saying I'm very much on the same page with you. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting together, singing hymns, believing in heaven. I don't think there's anything wrong with the belief that there is a God, or even the belief in Jesus, the resurrection. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would never judge anyone for their particular religious beliefs. There is a problem with guilt and shame and fake
Mhm.
consequences and lying to people to get them to believe what you're saying. And I also think that that belief based on fear is not true belief. I think the majority of very religious people don't actually believe what they're being told. They are in fear of being caught not believing, so they abide by
Mhm.
it. And they would tell you, I believe. I don't think they consciously realize the difference, but I think there's a huge difference with, I've done my research and I have come to the conclusion that this is what I believe, versus if I don't believe this, I'm going to hell. So therefore I believe it. That's like,
Mhm.
to me, that's not belief, that's coercion. But I,
Mhm.
I can 100% understand why people find comfort and peace and joy in the idea of worship. I don't understand how people can find comfort and love and joy in the punishment side, and how every
Mhm.
single good thing you're told in your religion has a negative: if you don't do it this way, if you don't do how I say, if you stray, if you this. And I think it's possible to build an army of wonderful people who, without having to threaten them with the consequences, right? Like Judaism doesn't even
Mhm.
believe in a hell. There's not even a hell, and yet I have met endless numbers of people who are devout Orthodox Jews, because
Mhm.
that's what they believe, that's what they think is the moral thing to do. And they're not doing it to save themselves from hellfire and damnation, because they don't believe that even exists. And so
Yeah.
I think it is possible to have what church is supposed to be and what church is for many, many people, without the consequences, the pain, the anxiety, the remorse, and the guilt, and which leads to treating people badly who you don't think are as Christian as you, changing
Mhm.
legislation to force people to be as Christian as you, et cetera, et cetera. That's where I think the
Mhm.
problem lies, the organized religion aspect.
Yeah. And I think sort of like going way back to the beginning of our convo in terms of like, I think one of the big things I had an issue with was not talking about action consequences and how to change it. Is I think also like Catholicism is so entrenched in guilt and shame and like that whole thing that like there is sometimes this feeling of like, oh, so if I do a bad thing, will I ever be good again? Or do I just have to wait for quote unquote God's judgment? And like, I have made mistakes in my lifetime, and there are moments where it's like it's been really hard for me to identify myself as a good individual based on those things. And I think it's because I was never really taught how to work through the guilt and shame and get on the other side, because they sort of just like you staying there. Like they love
Right.
to just like keep you in that spot. And again, I think it's that black and white, good, evil, bad, wrong. And I'm like, life is so fucking complicated. And I'm like, let's talk about that. Like,
Yes.
somebody can make a horrible decision and still find the ability to come back to themselves. Like, there's not a like 3 strikes you're out type thing. And I feel like religion doesn't really do that. Like, you're supposed to like pine for purity and all of this, and I'm like, nobody's fucking pure. I'm like, you shit yourself when you're 3 days old, and I'm like, you're dirty. Like, you're a
Right.
dirty that you're born. And so I think there's also this like the washing of sins, because then you're like, okay, so did I learn anything from this if I just got washed from them? Like,
Right.
it can, I think also there's, while there's like teachings, it's still the basicness of teachings, and we're not teaching critical thinking and theory. And I
Right.
think it's because a lot of the teachings are not basic, but like they're fables, like they are stories. And if we are to believe what it actually is, these stories were created essentially a generation after it happened. I'm like, I can't imagine. That would be like me going through college, waiting 60 years, and then being told to write down what happened.
Yeah.
Like, that's essentially what the Bible is. And I'm just like, I would
Literally.
have no fucking clue. And I'm like, I feel like the Bible is sort of like the first like tall tale of like storytelling, where I'm just like,
Yeah.
well, you gotta have a hook. So what's the
Yeah.
hook?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do you keep
Yeah.
people interested and wanting to come back? And so, yeah, yeah,
We can't even get through a game of telephone in a room full of 12 improvisers without the message being totally different by the end. And we made it
exactly.
2,000 years with the purest message to ever exist. And one of my comedian friends has a joke where she says, like, they didn't even know what glasses were back then. Like, why are we taking salvation experience and like
Yeah.
law from men who never even heard of glasses before, didn't even know, thought you just
Yep.
live your life blind? Um,
Yep.
is there any part of Catholicism or church or religion that you keep with you where you're like, this was a good lesson, or this was something like maybe you don't necessarily think it's attributed to religion, but it's something you learned in church that you keep with you?
I think I think again, what I take away from it is sort of watching my mom with it, of like, find the space that makes you feel whole and latch onto it. And as long as it is not, hurting a bunch of other people directly, like, hold on to that space for yourself. So I think that's what I tend to take away, where it's, I I forgot what I had done recently, but like I did not come up with this phrase, but I feel like it's just a phrase that comes around, where it was like, oh, that was my church.
Yeah.
And I see church as an heightened experience that pulls me out of what is currently happening in my life, and elevates in some way, shape, or form. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sure for some people, going to a Taylor Swift concert is church for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think I take away um, what the idea is of churches to clearly so many people, that it just didn't connect to me. And I'm like, okay, what is my church?
Yeah.
Type thing. And for me, I think my church is walking through Graceland with Spencer on a Sunday afternoon with coffee.
Yeah.
Like, that's just what my church is like,
Yeah.
walking in silence, sipping our coffee, looking at the birds now that it's like spring.
I love birds. I was gonna guess the theater. That's what I was gonna guess. I was thinking you were gonna say the theater, but that makes perfect sense. Like just taking a moment to kind
Yeah.
of decompress and like you get to kind of meditate away everything that's like pressing on you and stressing you out and just and I truly think that even if you don't believe in religion, you can have a spiritual experience.
Oh, for
And I
sure.
and I
Yeah.
kind of think that's what that is, you know, like you said, what's your church? Any place that makes you feel like you're having that like visceral, joyful, loving, like peaceful, meditative experience. That's a great I love that statement.
Mhm.
Find your church. Now I got to think like what is my church? I think it's anywhere that food is probably just to be honest with you. Anywhere where there's
I'm like,
food and
wait.
a good cup of coffee.
I'll like look forward to that TikTok where you're like, this is my church.
Yeah, this my church is sponsored by Polar carbonated water. Um, well, EM, I want to be respectful of your time. I know that I've had you for a while on here, but if you had a message for anybody who might be experiencing the same thing as you, maybe they're still going to church, but they don't feel like they belong. Maybe they've stopped going to church and they don't know where to look, or maybe it has nothing to do with church at all. Maybe it's an identity crisis that they're going through. What would you say
Mhm.
to that person?
Yeah, this is like a two-parter. The first is if you still feel very religious, I do truly believe that there is a place for everybody within religion. I don't think, once you become part of, the LGBT community, like you can't do church anymore. I do disagree with that, even though I don't practice. There are so many churches that you can look up that are like incredibly encompassing of everybody who like truly are um for everyone. So I'm like, I would be like, maybe just the church that you were in doesn't fit your needs. So go find the church that fits your needs. I don't think, saying fuck you to church is helpful, especially if you are getting something from it.
Right,
But if
right.
it's harming you a little bit at the same time, find a church that doesn't do the harm. And then in terms of just like, if they're starting to feel those feelings, my biggest thing would be explore them and connect with people who you truly trust as you're exploring in order to get feedback and support, because I think it's an incredibly isolating feeling, but having at least, even if it's just one person who says I've got you, um is incredibly helpful. I mean, like I don't say it lightly when I say like Spencer saves me, like truly.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like I can see that in the way that you guys interact with each other. It's like your spouses, your best friends, but also there's just like this level of connection that you don't often see with a lot of people. And I feel like I see it with you guys, where there's definitely like a story there. And while nobody ever has to know the story, there's like I would never worry about like a crush coming in between you guys or something like that, like something so petty, like tearing apart what you guys have, because you seem like you're communicative and you care about each other and you really have each other's backs, like really truly. And I just think that's so admirable, and I think it's something that's like, even when you were going through this transitional period, one of the things I was
Mhm.
not worried about was you guys as a couple. That was never even a thing I was worried about, because I knew that no matter what, like where you ended up while you were trying to kind of like discover and figure out who you were, I felt like you guys had that connection where it was like that they'll be fine. It'll be fine. Whatever it is,
Mhm.
it'll be fine. And they'll talk about it and they'll communicate. So that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your advice and your story. I was so glad I finally got to ask you these questions, because I know we've talked about a
Yes.
million things, but we've never talked about this. So I feel like I got to know kind of a new side of you today. And best of luck with your artistic endeavors. I always love seeing the virtual and in-person things that you're a part of, and I always love seeing you guys develop your interests um, and I just feel like you're the two people I know that were the most successful during lockdown when nothing should have worked. Like as like actors and writers, I feel like your lives should have absolutely shut down. And I feel like you both just completely skyrocketed when the world shut down, which was like enviable. And also, was that my brother in the background that just said that? Oh, I thought I heard a laugh that sounded like my brother for a second.
It might have been. He's actually on the phone with your mom, so
Oh,
we're all just kind of
that's fine. That's fine. Hi, Mom.
We're calls together.
Hi, Mom. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And where can we find anything if somebody's interested in finding past work of yours? Do you have a website or anything like that? Any upcoming virtual stuff?
Yes. Yeah, website is, I want to say it's emdavis.me. I want to say, or even emdavischai.me.
I'll find it and I'll link it
Facebook.
in the description.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Facebook, EM Davis, Instagram, EM Davis Chai. I'm not on the double T's, TikTok or Twitter.
Double T's.
I think that's it. I can only do what I've realized with myself is I can only do every other social media.
Yes. I like,
So like
you will never catch me snapping. I just don't snap. I've got one. It collects dust. I don't know.
The only reason I have Snapchat is because I realized that my family talked to each other through Snapchat more through text. Like I was the lone texter of the group and everybody was Snapchatting and I was like, well, I guess I gotta get on this fucking app, I guess. And that's like literally the only thing I do. I think I accidentally snapped a story the other day when I meant to send it to my family and somebody had responded to it and I was like, how did this person respond?
So what you're saying is
I had never done one.
What you're saying is we're not going to find you on TikTok. So don't look for you on TikTok.
Nope. Not on TikTok.
If you take anything away from tonight, listeners, they're not on TikTok. The end. That's the whole whole episode.
I am the millennial who watches TikTok on YouTube. Like that is, and I fully embrace it. I am that millennial.